In the oral tradition, something even more unique is stated about Abraham. Brace yourselves. The oral tradition rabbis say Abraham was the first Jew, because the term Jew in Hebrew denotes he who will praise Yah. And Abraham came in the world and made that his job. So in understanding the role of a Yehudi, of a Jew, and of an Israelite, the oral tradition says not only is Abraham the eponymous ancestor of the Hebrews, making him the first Hebrew, but when you go by understanding the name, the title, Yehuda, he's the first Jew. So I want you guys for a moment, any one of you or all of you, to speak towards the idea of what it means behind this term Hebrew. What do you guys think about the word Hebrew and exactly what that means to you?
I've always believed that in order to be a Ivri, you have to cross over, and that you have to go from one place to another place, and that can be physically, you know, whether you want to talk about, you know, being an exile and transatlantic slave trade, trans-Saharan slave trade, you know, the different exiles out of the land of Eretz Israel. But for sure, everybody has to cross over spiritually, and there has to be, you know, some form of coming from one place to another, and the journey's got to be far, because that's what avar means. It means to come across, to come from yonder, but it's somewhere far. And that in order to really be a Hebrew, I believe we all got to be willing to cross over, and that could be, you know, probably more spiritual, and also mental, trying to get from one place to another place, as we are being, you know, Yah's people. So that's something I've always kind of thought and kind of believed in.
All right. Malcolm?
I'll talk about its bloodline, because I thought something that was very interesting to me when I started studying this was that, you know, after his wife died, he married again and had 6 other sons, and all of those, you know, tribes of people are Hebrews by bloodline, and we don't think about that. And it's interesting the difference between a Hebrew and quote unquote the actual 12 tribes, because all of his bloodline are Hebrews, but they're not all of the 12 tribes. And breaking that down and figuring out that all of his sons, if they come from Abraham, they're Hebrews. So kind of a lot of those nations or tribes that became nations in that region are of Abraham's bloodline, which is why you see Ishmael descendants, you know, claiming Abraham and those type of things. Those, you know, by bloodline, they're Hebrews, but they're not part of the 12 tribes.
That's a fact. You know, this is a hotly contested idea in the Israelite community, that anyone other than Israel could have the title Hebrew. I'm of strong belief and faith that the term Hebrew should apply to Abraham's descendants, which means effectively, as much as some people don't want to hear this, so we really don't think Esau was a Hebrew?
Right.
The truth is the truth. We got to get beyond the like.
I mean, the Midianites, you got to look at all the sons he had with the Torah as well, right?
Come on.
So there was a lot. Yes, sir.
All of those tribes and all of those nations of people are technically by bloodline Hebrews.
Right. And let me do this. Let me take both of those and fuse them: the spiritual, historical, or the spiritual ancestral reality. In Abraham entering into the covenant with Yah, he becomes a priest, right? He becomes also a prophet, and he is also a king. And so when we look at the offices that Abraham occupied, he was a Mashiach as well. He was an anointed one, right? And so we look at this, and Abraham prefigures, and you just talked about Cold Malka, that this is the journey we all have to go through. We know Israel is supposed to be a priestly kingdom. And so what Abraham embodied is much as of what that we must embody as we look at the Hebrew concept, the crossing over. But we have to start really defining what we come from and what we come to, right? And when we can really start to identify our priesthood, we can identify our sovereignty in Yah as his kingdom representatives, and we can identify the prophetic role as well in revealing the will of Yah, right? Teaching the world how to separate the unclean from the clean, teaching the world how to serve Yah and what's set apart, what's profane, and then revealing the will of Yah to the world, right? As we undergo the repair of this age, you know, we fall into the realm of Abraham, because you look at Abraham, he was fruitful and multiply. His seed first were not either Ishmael or Yitzhak. It was the ones that he gave birth into life through Torah. That's where he really typified the commandment of being fruitful and multiplying. And I look at how being of that bloodline, being of that seed, that promised seed that goes back to Genesis 3, and looking at the spirit of him being a Baal Teshuvah, you know, captures the fullness, I would say, of that reality that we all are supposed to enter into.
That's right. That's right. You know, Abraham's life journey becomes a template, obviously, for many world religions. There are some scholars and theologians that even are of the belief that it is the faith of Abraham that later in history becomes the root of parts of Hindu faith, where there is a deity known as Brahma.
Yes, sir.
And when you get into the culture of that ideology, right, you come to realize that it's based on what they perceive as a historical character who was later deified. Sounds familiar? A lot of great people in history at some point, based on their gauge, the way that we're gauging and measuring their life story, at some point, some cultures begin to deify these people, make a god out of them.
Right.
So it's not a stretch that someone who becomes so great as Abraham, who, according to the Bible and oral tradition, Abraham not only makes a name in Canaan land, he already got a name in Sumer land.
Yes, indeed.
Correct.
He has an encounter with the then king, who the oral tradition says is Nimrod.
Right.
He goes into Egypt. He's with kings there. So someone with this type of major world influence,
right,
and is also said to be astute in the natural sciences, astronomy, philosophy, has the highest ideas of spirituality. Somebody's going to get the bright idea that maybe they're godlike. Someone may get a brighter idea and say maybe they are a god. Right? This is the belief of people in the ancient world. So it's not far-fetched as an idea to see how it is that cultures apart from Israel do come to deify him or memorialize him in their literature, to where you open the Quran and he becomes a major key player in the Quran.
Yes.
Right? Which I want to cover at some point in this conversation, but I do want to develop more. So are there any more of you that want to speak towards the term Hebrew and what it means to you?
I think I'm pretty clear on my standpoint. Yeah, I'm good.
All right. I'm going to weigh on that just really, really quick. So I've always understood the term Hebrew similarly to what you all have said, that it denotes crossing over from one side to the other. So that first, the term Hebrew denotes Abraham that leaves the region of his fathers, the land of his nativity, which is the land of Sumer, which the Bible calls Ur-Kasdim, or Ur of the Chaldees, makes his way into Canaan land. So yes, you have at the one end the term Hebrew, Ivri, rooted in the word avar, denotes one who crossed over. Yes, he crossed over from a physical body of land and entered another physical body of land. But here is where our oral tradition provides so much wealth. In the oral tradition, it is stated that when Abraham lived in Sumer, his father was a maker of idols and a priest of said cult in the region of Sumer. What a lot of people may not know about ancient history is, unlike today, where someone makes a statue of Mary and a statue of Jesus to be used as worship in a Catholic church, unlike today, in the ancient world, the people who were sculptors of idols, they were high priests in those cults. These people took their religion very seriously, to the extent that the very person sculpting the idol had to be initiated into the deepest mysteries. So we take it for granted, not knowing the history, when we read in the Bible that Tirach was an idol maker, not even fully understanding the implications, because if he's an idol maker in Sumer, that means he's a high priest in the Sumerian cult, which means he's a person that is astute or privy to mysterious teachings behind the veil, as it were, right, into the esoteric schools of thought in Sumer. And Abraham is his son, right? And when you think of what are some of the dominating views in Sumer at that time in history, astrology.
Yeah.
That was like the main thing.
They played in that.
Really, really good in astrology.
Absolutely.
And that's testified today in the historical record that some of the oldest areas of looking at astronomy, they drew maps of the planets before the invention of the telescope, where we're able to see it.
Come on.
There are planets you can't see with the naked eye. Not only did they draw them and reflect them the way that we see them today, but even the distance. Come on. And Abraham comes from this region, right? So Abraham is in a region where idolatry is rampant. But I don't want us to lose sight of something, our community, right? Religious people, because when we think of idolatry and we know that the Bible has a prohibition against it, we automatically say, well, if they were idolaters, they were dumb. Are you kidding me? There are people right now today that serve gods other than the true and the living God. But if we take intellectual tests with them, many of us going to fail and they're going to pass. Being an idolater doesn't necessitate that one is without any wisdom at all. The Bible even speaks of a person being wise to do evil. It even takes wisdom to go into certain evils, right? So there's much knowledge in this region that Abraham, Avinu, Abraham, our forefather, comes from. And his father is an idol maker, therefore making them idolaters. But Abraham, according to the oral tradition, at the age of 5, realizes that, hey, the sun, moon, and the stars are not in operation on their own.
Right.
That there must be a what, as we know in science, a prime mover.
Right.
Something that's causing the movement of the cosmos.
The uncaused cause.
That's right. So Abraham comes to the understanding that, no, there's one God that rules over this all. So Abraham not only crossed over physically from Sumer into Canaan, but he first made an intellectual and spiritual crossover by going from idolatry into the understanding of the one God.
Yeah. And I'm going to add to that, if you may. And it's so important you bring up the stars and the moon and the sun, because when Abraham came into that consciousness, he knew their roles now. He knew how to utilize the stars as relates, and even in serving Yah and recognizing signs, recognizing season, recognizing times, right? And the purpose of these servants that Yah has created. And you see that passed down to his descendants. When you read Joshua, you see Benjamin locate Yosef on the throne with him using a star map, right? So astrotheology, a very essential. And I'm not saying in worship, but understanding how to discern the times and use the stars as maps, right? Even when you look at our ancestors coming out of enslavement, they knew how to use the stars to find their way.
Sure did.
They knew how to recognize the times through recognizing the heavens. And so this is so important for us to really recapture. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because science, right? We have to understand the fusion of science and spirituality, and how our spirituality is in fact science. Why? Because it's law-based, number one. Laws have scientific proof of them being able to have the same result and the same conclusion after you undergo the experiment, and you see it yields the same result every time. Well, that's what the Torah does, and that's why this word of Yah through our ancestors such as Abraham, and we can't forget Sarah. If we're talking about Abraham, we got to talk about Sarah. You know, and she was a priestess extraordinaire as well. And to keep this in mind, this will be my last point. What you brought up was so important of his high priesthood, of Torah's high priesthood, because in the traditions of the oral tradition of Jasher, it talks about this was Nimrod's right-hand man. Right. Terah was his right-hand man.
Yeah.
So Abraham grew up with affluence. He grew up with a lot of privilege, you know, and he grew up with a lot of influence as well. Because if you think about it, if you the son of the high priest, Well, you're being initially initiated in that. That's from top. So for him to come to his better senses, if you will, and realize who the true and living one is, that's amazing. You know, so that's a truly crossover. So great, excellent points.
I would say, kind of going back what you had pulled out about their knowledge of the stars. You know, that's when you teach like world history just in a school curriculum, they talk about Mesopotamia being the cradle of civilization, and this being, you know, where everything kind of jumps off. But because they were so adept with the stars, you know, I believe it's in Jasher, either Jubilees, where at Abraham's birth, you know, they knew something was up
100%.
because of the stars in the Shemayim, and that they knew that this whoever is born under this marker, you know, they had it figured out. This man, he gonna end up tearing down the kingdom. You know, so they were very, very astute, and they had a ton of learning centers in that region.
I want to say I 1000% agree with everything that the brothers were saying, and how important it is for us to stop being afraid of learning things that we need to pick back up. And there's a big fear in our community of knowledge in this area, and we have to disassociate what was made for good and used for evil. But it's still the Most High's creation, and he made it for us to understand his times. And like the brothers were saying, you know, I started to study a lot of the Abraham, a lot of the patriarchs were all born under feast days, which is why they knew these signs and symbols. They understood the times. And that's how they were indicators of something special was going to happen. It was a marked feast day, and they knew what that looked like according to the sun, moon, and stars. I also wanted to say that it is not a coincidence that the Sumerian religion is getting a refresh start. Like, this is a big thing that's happening now with the what's this, Billy Carson and these people.
Billy Carson and
Anunnaki and everything.
Anunnaki. Yeah,
religion is coming back with a full force at these end times, and it's not like everything that
makes sense.
And it's happening again. It's just so, it's crazy. But that Sumerian is taking a big, and it's kind of like people are confusing even our beliefs with the Sumerian. And sometimes you'll hear somebody talking and you'll be thinking they're aligned with what you know and what you're saying, and then they deviate and be left somewhere, and you be like, oh no, they talking about stuff.
That is an excellent point. That's an excellent point. I've seen that a few times, and I was trying to really figure out what the angle was, because he's calling, you know, this other Sumerian deity now. This is what he originally was, and this here, you know. And if I may, I want to talk to that. I did a lesson with one of my brothers, Kimathi Malakuel, some years ago, and we traced how the Bantu migration led to the Levant, you know, the knowledge as well, and how when you look at the evolution, and you read this book, I mentioned it before in one of our interviews I had with Zion about Albert Churchward's The Origin and Evolution of Religion, and it talks about how the knowledge of man travels up the Nile, you know, from the Monopotapa region. But when we trace this and you look at it, Israel ends up separating itself from these traditional African beliefs that have, you know, just some different acculturations, but they still use totems, right? They still use different idolatrous expressions for the creator, where Israel completely distances itself from that, right? And so when you look at all these other religions, you see that there's threads even with Israel. However, the thing that sets us apart, which one of the things that Abraham did and Sarah, was to realize the transcendent nature of Yah. There are no images that can encompass the body of Yah in his transcendence, you know. And so these things are very important, that was reintroduced through Abraham, which set itself apart from the other ideas of who the creator was that the world was entertaining. So even for you to say that today occult Malachi is crucial, because we have to start seeing this again. And it's that mystery, because just as there's mysteries related to the kingdom, there's also the depths and the mysteries of Satan at work, and that iniquity that is distancing us from the Torah and this oneness of Yah. So I definitely appreciate it. I needed to see that. Toda for sharing that.
What I think is interesting about the Billy Carson brother, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I always feel like history kind of repeats in cycles, and that this Sumerian, Anunnaki, these things, to me, I just feel like that the world is in a place now where there's just so much wickedness that people's have just opened themselves up to the powers and the principalities, and that whatever ancient connection people had with other principalities, deities, that it's now being, kind of like reopened back up to where people are, kind of pulling back the Wizard of Oz's curtain, so to say, and kind of getting back into, these Sumerian concepts, Anunnaki. You got certain artists. I love Jay Electronica. I mean, he's obviously a 5%er. He's an NOI brother, but he spits a lot of bars. But even he'll get off and talk about the return of the Anunnaki, and so I just feel like that there are things going on in the atmosphere, and people are just like I saw a clip on Facebook, and it might have been Juanita Bynum or somebody, and she was saying that the serpent was not wrong and Eve wasn't wrong, because the serpent was just giving Eve knowledge on how she could grow and how she could carry the Son of God. And it was just wild. But the thing that caught me was that she was talking about receiving knowledge from the serpent. And I just think we're at a time now where, people will receive knowledge from, the dark powers in the earth. So I agree with that.
We're definitely in that time, man. One of the more controversial areas that comes up as well when we think of Abraham is to deal with what I would call is maybe the elephant in the room for people who are Bible-based, is to find him in Islam. So